Beneath a sky of inky black punctuated only by distant stars, the Antarctic expanse lay silent and frozen. A bone-chilling wind swept across the broad sea ice, carrying with it shards of spindrift that bit at exposed feathers. In this world of perpetual night, Selka the emperor penguin huddled among thousands of her kin. Their bodies pressed together in a living wall of warmth, each bird stood on sturdy legs buried in snow, necks bowed against the gale. Selka's downy chick, no larger than a football, nestled atop her feet, tucked beneath the fluffy overhang of her brood pouch. Its soft, gray fuzz was still damp from the hatching weeks before, and it trembled with each gust that rattled the penguin colony's tight formation. Selka shifted her weight, muscles locked in place for hours on end, sending a soothing rumble through her body that lulled her chick into dozing comfort. Around them, the steady humming of the colony was the only sound, an orchestra of low trumpeting calls, the scrape of shifting ice, and the whispered conversations of hungry stomachs awaiting the sun's return. Far to the south, the horizon glowed occasionally with the muted promise of dawn, though the sun itself would not clear the edge of the world for another month. Until then, Selka and her fellow parents faced the greatest trial of their lives, preserving the fragile warmth of new life against sub-zero temperatures, winds so fierce they could uproot snowdrifts, and the relentless isolation of the polar plateau. Every night, the birds rocked gently on the sea ice, their hearts beating in unison as they shared body heat, a single, united being sustained by the hope of survival. Within the huddle, Selka felt her chick's light pressure against her chest. Its eyes, barely open, regarded her with blind trust. She pressed closer, tucking the chick's flippers under her breast to share her own insulating down. Outside the circle, the wind howled like a predator at bay, testing the colony's resolve with jagged blasts that threatened to fracture the ice beneath their webbed feet. But Selka and thousands like her would not yield. In the frozen darkness, where even the bravest heart might falter, Selka's fierce maternal instinct burned brightest. She lowered her head, touching beak to chick's forehead in a promise unspoken yet unwavering: no storm, no night, and no fracture of ice would ever sever the bond between mother and child. As the polar wind roared at the limits of endurance, Selka stood firm, her body a fortress of warmth in an endless season of cold. The first fragile glow of the returning sun painted the horizon in pale silver, and with it came a subtle, unsettling warmth. Selka stood at the edge of the huddle, her heart pounding as she felt the ice beneath her feet tremble ever so slightly. Around her, thousands of emperor penguins nestled tightly together, their collective warmth the only buffer against the relentless Antarctic chill. But now, the snow beneath them began to soften, each flake losing the brittle resistance it had held through months of frost. A distant crack echoed across the ice, a sound so sharp it cut through the colony's murmur like a rifle shot. Instantly, the tightly packed birds stiffened. Selka sensed fear ripple through the huddle as heads snapped up, beaks raised in alarm. Tiny fissures snaked outward from the origin of the sound, racing toward the colony's heart. A second crack, louder and more menacing, punctuated the tense silence, and then a third. Suddenly, the ice erupted. A wall of snow and ice sheared away at the edge of the floe, crashing into the colony with bone-shaking force. Penguins squawked and flapped as the living circle was torn apart. Selka's world spun in a blur of churning white. She slapped her flippers against her sides, stamping her feet to maintain balance as the floe shifted beneath her. In the chaos, Selka felt her chick slip from beneath her brood pouch. A terrified peep reached her over the roar of fracturing ice. She whirled just in time to see her chick swept away on a jagged piece of broken floe, drifting toward the inky waters beyond the reef. With a heart-stopping jolt, Selka sprinted to the newly formed edge, her powerful legs churning through slushy snow and broken ice. "Chick! Hold on," she called out, her voice raw with desperation. But the distance between them widened with every second. Before she could reach him, the ice beneath her gave another groan and cracked further, separating her from the fragment that carried her chick. Selka skidded to the floe's new shoreline, toes on the brink of open water, and she saw him huddled at the far edge of the fractured plateau, alone, small, and trembling against the void. Without hesitation, Selka crouched low, anchored herself against the fresh wind, and leapt onto the broken floe. The splintered ice rocked and pitched under her weight, but her resolve was ironclad. As the floe drifted into deeper water, she planted her feet firmly and faced the frozen expanse ahead, a vast labyrinth of jagged cracks and treacherous channels. Behind her, the colony's cries faded into the wind, and before her lay only fractured ice and one singular purpose: to reach her lost chick. Selka plunged forward from the fractured floe, the chill spray of slush lashing her belly as the broken ice rocked beneath her weight. Her chick's frantic peeps echoed in her ears, spurring her onward despite the scream of wind in her ears. The floe, once broad and solid, had transformed into a perilous obstacle course of jagged plates and yawning cracks. Every step demanded absolute concentration. One slip could send her tumbling into the inky water below. Ahead, a broad shoal of pancake ice stretched toward a distant ridge. Each pancake, a flat disk of frozen sea, jostled against its neighbors as the tide rolled beneath, rising and falling with dogged persistence. Selka angled her body to leap between two plates, talon toes scraping their rough edges for grip. She landed with a slosh of frigid spray, then pivoted to pull her chick aboard behind her. The little one's gray down was matted with ice, but its eyes shone with relief at being reunited. Selka nudged him gently, encouraging the next leap. As they advanced, the surface beneath them groaned ominously. Selka's ears pricked at the low tremor vibrating through the floes, a warning that the pack was still shifting under the warming sun. She slowed, listening for the telltale thwack of ice meeting ice. When the sound came, she froze, then darted aside as a slab beneath her chick lifted like a trapdoor and spat a geyser of seawater into the air. Chilled to the bone, the chick let out a startled peep, and Selka flapped her wings once to settle in an instinctive embrace of warmth amid chaos. Farther on, a group of veteran ice bulls, massive male penguins whose ponderous bodies had weathered seasons of surging tides, stood on a flat, stable floe. Each bull tapped the ice with his beak, sending resonant echoes across the fractured field. This ancient ritual marked the safest channels. Subtle patterns of cracking indicated where the floe was thickest. Selka recognized one bull by the distinct notch in his flipper and called out, her trumpeting notes conveying gratitude. The bull let out a series of deep clicks and shifted his bulk to reveal a solid path across a narrow lagoon of slushy brine. She guided her chick alongside the bull's thick form, each small flipper stroke synchronized to the bull's rhythmic tapping. They traversed the lagoon in measured bounding steps, slap of ice, click of beak, splash of water. Halfway across, a sudden surge of current rattled the edges, and a nearby pancake tilted dangerously. Selka pivoted, pressing her chick against her brood pouch, and planted her flippers on stable ice until the floe settled once more. When the danger passed, she exhaled a slow, relieved breath and nudged her chick forward. Now the chick's confidence grew, and its flippers carried it more assuredly. Selka led the way onto a narrow ridge of brash ice, small, jagged fragments frozen haphazardly together. Each step required deliberation. She probed with her beak, tested with her flippers, and only then shifted her weight. Behind her, the chick followed in her footprints, eyes fixed on her broad back as though guided by an unbreakable trust. As the sun climbed higher, the winds began to slacken, and the ice creaked less fiercely. A distant rumble spoke of another shift far to the south, but for now, the path held. Selka and her chick crested the ridge onto a broad, unbroken floe bathed in brilliant light. Ahead lay the promise of safer ice and the silhouette of the main colony, its dense black shapes undulating like a dark wave. Selka's heart swelled with hope. The fractured pack had nearly claimed her chick, but together, guided by ancient wisdom, fierce resolve, and the hive mind of her emperor kin, they had traversed its shifting maze and drawn ever closer to home. Selka's relief at spotting her chick on a stable floe was short-lived. As she and the downy chick slid onto the broad ice, a sudden ripple in the glassy water caught her eye. From the inky depths, a sleek, torpedo-shaped silhouette surged upward, dark gray with a mottled pattern, eyes glinting with cold intent. The leopard seal burst free in a spray of icy spray, jaws agape in a hungry snarl. Selka froze for a heartbeat, heart hammering against her ribs. The seal's powerful body slammed onto the edge of the floe, cracking the ice into spiderweb fractures beneath its bulk. With a terrifying crack, the floe shifted, and Selka felt the tremor under her flippers. The chick let out a high-pitched peep of alarm, crouching low against her brood pouch. Selka's maternal instinct flared. She spread her wings wide and emitted a sharp, ringing trumpet that rolled across the ice like a clarion call. From the surrounding floes, other emperor penguins, males and females alike, heard Selka's signal and surged forward in disciplined formation. They assembled like an avian phalanx, bodies pressed beak to tail, a living barrier between predator and prey. The seal lunged again, snapping its massive jaws at the nearest edge, but met a wall of flapping flippers and pecking beaks. Each time it struck, ice splintered beneath its bulk, and Selka's cohort rocked as one, maintaining their line. Selka positioned herself at the center, Chick safely tucked beneath her, and peered into the seal's dark eyes. The predator's breath steamed in the cold air as it considered its options. Around her, the colony's unified resolve manifested in measured, rhythmic dipping of heads and synchronized calls, a warning chorus that resonated with ancestral power. The seal circled, testing the defense with a grating growl, but the penguins held their ground, shuffling forward to tighten the ring. Minutes stretched like hours as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fractured ice. Then, as if deciding the battle was not worth the cost, the leopard seal gave one final, disdainful hiss. With a flick of its powerful flippers, it slid back into the inky water with a plume of spray, the floe shuddering in its wake. The penguins exhaled in a collective sigh, wings folding back against their sides. Selka pressed close to her chick, her heart pounding with gratitude and awe. Against the seal's ambush, it had been unity and a mother's courageous call that turned the tide, forging a fortress of life on the fractured ice. As the sun crested the horizon in a blaze of pale gold, the fractured pack ice shimmered with renewed promise. Selka paused on the edge of the broad floe, her feathers ruffled by the gentle morning breeze. Beside her, her chick, now a bit steadier on its webbed feet, blinked against the low sun, downy plumage catching every ray like a halo. The frozen expanse that had been an arena of terror only hours before now lay bathed in radiant light, each crystalline facet of ice sparkling like 1,000 tiny beacons leading them home. Behind them, the distant murmur of the main colony reached Selka's ears, a low, rhythmic chorus of trumpeting calls and soft wheezing breaths. With her chick tucked safely beneath her brood pouch, she began the final leg across the ice. Every footfall was deliberate, honed by the urgency of maternal love and the memory of the seal's ambush. The chick followed in her prints, flippers pressing into the snow with growing confidence, trusting Selka's every measured step. As they emerged onto the thick, unbroken ice that led toward the colony, the ranks of huddled penguins parted in respectful silence. One by one, birds turned to greet her return. A familiar bull with a scar across his beak tapped his flipper in salutations. A trio of attentive females leaned in, preening their own chicks but offering quick, approving nods. When Selka reached the center of the huddle, the entire circle rippled open, creating a warm enclave against the lingering chill. The collective body heat pressed in, a tangible wave of comfort that banished every shiver from Selka's bones. Selka lowered her head and called softly, her voice a gentle warble that cut through the colony's hum. Her chick peeped back, a jubilant, high-pitched note that echoed off the ice. In that sacred moment, mother and child reunited beneath the returning sun, their relief mirrored in every feathered face around them. The other parents pressed forward, tapping their bills in affectionate greeting, nuzzling the chicks down, and sharing tidbits of regurgitated nourishment to celebrate its safe return. All through the day, the colony remained gathered in a grand fellowship. Overhead, the pale sky shifted toward vibrant blue, and distant icebergs loomed like silent guardians. Selka and her chick explored the small sanctuary of densely packed mates, testing their flippers on firmer ground, tasting their first nibble of krill brought by older penguins returning from the sea. The chick's tentative peck soon turned into eager mouthfuls, its belly warming with every bite, an echo of the nourishment Selka had provided on their life-threatening trek. As dusk approached, the penguins began their collective march toward the breeding grounds, a grand procession across the ice. Selka led with steady resolve, her chick skittering at her side, every so often pausing to look up with bright, trusting eyes. Behind them, the colony's line stretched toward the endless white, a living tapestry of perseverance. In Selka's heart bloomed a profound sense of triumph. They had faced cracking ice, predators' jaws, and the abyss of the open sea, and emerged stronger, bound by devotion and community. Under the soft glow of the returning sun, as the sky deepened to lavender and rose, mother and chick climbed the gentle slope of the breeding hill. The vast Antarctic night had given way to promise, and in that luminous twilight, Selka knew the greatest journey she had taken was not across the broken ice, but back into the warm embrace of her colony and the unbreakable heart of a mother's love.